Let's go through the process of sewing an overlay maxi skirt perfect for fall. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today I'm using a free pattern that was provided by It's Always Autumn. So it's a blog that had this amazing pattern for a maxi skirt, and we're just going to be taking it up a little bit. So in her blog, she actually walks through exactly what you need to cut out your fabric. She talks about having 2.5 yards. For this version of the skirt I'm making, you're going to want 2.5 yards of both a lining as well as a overlay for that skirt, so you would have two different fabrics. And then in addition, you are measuring your hips as well as measuring the length of your skirt. So for the hips measurement, you're going to take that, then divide it by 4 and add an inch to it. And then you just want however long you want the skirt to be as well. And she provides a really great breakdown and structure for how to do that. So I will be sure to include a link, and I just want to make sure that we're giving her credit for where credit is due. So as you can see, I have everything traced out on my fabric for my lining. But what I did for this lining is that length, I actually made it about 5 inches shorter than what I would want the full skirt to be. So if we go with this overlay material, I have folded it twice. So I folded it in half and then folded it half again, so I have this double folded corner up at the top left. And then from that corner, what I'm doing is using the hip measurement that I took and then divided by 4 and added 1. So mine ended up being around 10.5 inches. I am marking that at the top, and then from there, I'm kind of going at a diagonal to create the length of my skirt measurement. So for me, that was about 34 inches, and I'm just marking 34 inches down from the point of that hip measurement at the top. So going all the way through, marking this down. And then at the bottom, what we'll be doing once I get to that 34 inches is I'm just connecting this to create almost like a curve. And again, on her blog, she really goes through a lot more detail on how to cut that out, which is why I'm going through a little bit faster now, to the idea that, if you have any questions, she provides all of the information. So here is the overlay for the front of the skirt, and then I also have the matching one for the back. And what we need to do now is cut out a waistband portion in our lining that's going to be matching with this overlay. So what I mean by that is when we actually start sewing this, we want to be sure that everything looks nice and clean. So I'm just taking a little bit of extra fabric that I have from the lining, I fold it in half, and then I'm cutting out this waistband portion that we will be using so that we can create a casing for our elastic. So whatever measurement you had for the upper portion of your skirt, that is what the top of this is. And then I'm just going about 2 inches down. And then as you can see, I'm just cutting out the bottom portion as well, so that we have both the front and the back of sort of like a little waistband casing, if you will. Then at the bottom of that waistband, what I'm doing is folding that fabric over about 1/2 inch so that I create a really clean looking edge. And hopefully this will make a little bit more sense when we actually come to the fabric. So I have the overlay material and I have it with the right side facing down, and I am now going to be matching the waistband portion that we just did that pressing on so that the right side of that is facing down as well. So you can see here that that's that little folded edge, and then if you look from the front, it just looks like you have a black band, which that's what we want. And now I'm going to be sewing all 3 of these edges and doing that for the front and the back. So just going through and attaching that waistband to this overlay panel so that you have a really nice and clean look and we won't be able to see the elastic through it. So when we add the elastic, if we didn't do this right now, you would be able to see like a white elastic waistband, and we don't want that. So this is going to allow us to have it be hidden. Now we're going to start working on the side seams for our skirt. I'm going to be using French seams for this, as I didn't want to have to rely on a serger, as not everybody has a serger, but also because we are using that mesh material, we want to be sure that everything looks nice and clean, as you're going to be able to see through it. So I'm just going through to start with French seams. What we're going to be doing is matching with wrong sides together our fabric and sewing up both of those edges. So I've repeated this here. As you can see, we have wrong sides of our fabric together, and I'm just going to be sewing up both edges. And then we're just going to be taking a straight seam for both the side seams for the lining as well as the side seams for our overlay. And in using this mesh material, I did not have any issues with just using a regular presser foot and my normal needle. So now what I'm going to go do is, you can see for both those seams we have done, I am just going to be cutting about 1/4 of an inch away from that seam. So I originally took about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm now going through cutting it down to about 1/4 of an inch and then turning this fabric so that the right sides are now together. And we are going to be pressing this so that the right sides are together, and I am going to be taking another seam along where we just took that seam. So you can see I'm going through, I'm pressing this with my fingers. The only reason I'm using my fingers for this is because this mesh fabric has sequins on it, and if I use heat, most likely the sequins are going to melt, and we don't want to do that. So I'm using a finger pressing technique, and now I'm just going through and recreating where I'm going to be taking the seam. So this is going to allow us to have a really nice encased, enclosed seam that's going to give us a really professional looking finish, and it's going to be a really nice touch since we are using this mesh material. So once I've repeated that for both sides, I'm just going to take again about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's just going to enclose our seams and give us a really nice look, and we will have the outside of our skirt done. And then I'm just going to repeat all of these same exact steps for my lining. So as you can see, I'm going through, trimming up that seam so it gets down to about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, doing this for both sides of the skirt. And then for this material, I am able to press it. So now I'm just going to press this out with heat. And for this, what I've done is I've folded it so that the right sides are together, and then I'm just pressing as close as I can to that seam that we took so that it can be nice and flat and smooth. And then I'll just go through and pin this up, or in this case I'm using quilting clips, and then just taking that 1/2 inch seam allowance again so that this edge can also be enclosed, and it will give us a really nice finish. Now once I have both of those done, what it's time to do now is combine both the outside of my skirt with the lining. Now to match these up, we are going to be matching the right side of our overlay material with the wrong side of our lining, and then once we then take the seam all the way around the top, we'll be folding in the lining so that it's on the inside. This will cover up any of the seams that we did for the lining, and it'll look really nice. So I'm just going through matching the fabric so that those two fabrics are now being connected at the top portion, and then just taking a seam all the way around. So again, for this is sewing the right side of our fabric with the wrong side of the lining. So you can see here that because of how we did that waistband, you're not able to see the casing at all. Everything's looking really good and really clean. So I'm just now going to go through and pin up 1.5 inches away from the edge of our waistband, and this is going to create the casing all the way around. And then I am marking where I'm going to leave a gap, as we're not going to be sewing there, so that we are able to add the elastic. So as you can see now, I'm just going through with my hands. I am adjusting any of the fabric at any point to make sure it's not bulking up, but I'm just sewing into place that casing so now we can add the elastic. So here's the elastic that I'm using. I find that this is a 1-inch non-roll elastic, and it works really well. So for this, you just want to find your waist measurement and then subtract about 1 inch away from that, and then that will be how much elastic you will need. So now I'm going to be using a safety pin wherever that opening was that I had left for my casing. So mine's right there. I'm going to be taking the safety pin, attaching it to my elastic, and then just working my elastic through the casing that I just created. Once you have your elastic all the way through, we're then going to be taking the safety pin off and matching both ends of the elastic together, and just taking about 5 or 6 seams to sew these two pieces of elastic. Once that's done, you can then readjust the elastic, make sure it is hidden inside your skirt, and then just close up the rest of that casing that we had so that it can be complete. Here's what my skirt looks like so far. I absolutely love it. The last step we really need to do though is worry about the hem. Now for this overlay fabric, I wasn't too worried about a hem since it's not going to fray, so I only hemmed my lining, and I just did a rolled hem where it looks really nice and clean. So here's what the skirt looks like. This came together really easily, and again, I will be sure to link the original pattern so that you can follow the step-by-step example of how to cut everything out. All we did in this was just add that additional overlay material and use French seam so that it had a really nice and clean look. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next.